Hey folks, I'm Brett Kinsella. This is Game, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this mostly every week around 11 a.m. on Thursday, and we talk about the top generative AI news in the land, and we have a lot of it. In fact, we were off last week because of Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S. We've got 2 weeks of news, and I think we just packed in 3 or 4 months worth of news in the past 2 weeks. And to break it all down, I have my colleague Eric Schwartz with me.
Yeah, 3 or 4 months seems underestimating how much news happened just the last couple weeks.
Yeah, it's really pretty extraordinary. And I think we're going to get right into it. And I know there'll be people joining, just because we just went live. We went live a couple minutes late, but hopefully everybody will be okay with that. And I wanted to talk about the first story. So everyone probably thinks we're going to talk about OpenAI and the tumult, and we will talk about that. But today is ChatGPT's birthday. So let's take a moment, blow out some candles, give a wish to ChatGPT, which kind of changed the world. You're speechless?
No, I'm thinking it kind of, definitely. How many budgets, how many proposed laws, how many new ways of doing everything from education to war have now been altered, at least in some form, because of people encountering ChatGPT.
It is pretty extraordinary. And Altman posted a little while ago, a year ago tonight, we were probably just sitting around the office putting the finishing touches on ChatGPT before the next morning's launch. What a year it's been. So I thought that was pretty poignant of him to do that. But let's walk through a few of the things from ChatGPT. You and I have been talking about that a little bit in terms of a timeline. So, you can help me go through the list because I'll probably forget a few things. But it took 5 days to get to 1 million users, and everyone was pretty impressed by it at the time. We'd done a breakdown because I had early access to Lambda, the precursor of Palm, Google's version of this. It's been around for longer than ChatGPT. We did a comparison of that. And then a month later, Microsoft makes their big investment, says they're going to do all these different things. And then we learned that ChatGPT is the fastest application to 100 million users. UBS put that data out. That was published on February 1st. After that, there were leaks around ChatGPT Plus, and then the launch of ChatGPT Plus. In between that, Microsoft not only had made the big investment, but announced Azure OpenAI service, including a ChatGPT API, which turned out to be GPT 3.5 Turbo. And then they overhauled Bing and created this new search engine, which is basically ChatGPT inside of Bing, right? And we had Bard came out around the same time and had all sorts of issues. But then there was just this series of announcements afterwards. So we've got a subscription service, we have incognito mode, we've got plugins. Code Interpreter came out around that time as well. And then over the summer, there were a lot of people who were breathlessly claiming, oh, ChatGPT is dead. Look at it. Their website visits are down. But in the interim, they weren't accounting for the fact that it took 6 days to get 500,000 downloads on iOS. 3 months later in July, it only took 1 day to get 1 million downloads on Android. Yipit Data put out in July, if I remember correctly, 230 million users, they estimated, monthly active users at the time. Andreessen Horowitz estimated 2 million US paid users. So that was ChatGPT Plus. Someone else I'd reported on had suggested a 4 million number, which I think was worldwide. So that would also make sense. Oh, and I almost forgot, ChatGPT was banned in Italy in the spring and then brought back. And that was shortly after a big outage, a self-imposed outage based on a security vulnerability that was identified and then patched. There was an outage later that was more recent, and then ultimately ChatGPT. Let's see, over 50 million downloads on mobile. Obviously, the searches went way back up in the fall. There's been a lot of interest. Around the time of GPTs, they stopped accepting subscriptions because they couldn't support the service level agreements because there are just too many people coming in. GPTs, I count around 7,000 of them today. Those were just announced on the 6th. So much more. What did I miss?
I mean, you know, we mentioned like how it kind of changed the world. I mean, it's technology reflections in pop culture are not perfect, but it's amazing how quickly it became a part of TV, of movies. ChatGPT helped write a South Park episode. ChatGPT helped write press releases for the U.S. military. It really did sort of instantly become part of how people talk about technology this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the sound of that old-fashioned phone in the background. You actually have a landline phone, huh?
Yeah, which has not had a phone call in, I think, 3 months. So I was a little surprised by that.
I'm certainly a telemarketer. So the ChatGPT, and I think it's a really important thing that like a lot of people don't recognize, is that it was so revolutionary as a consumer product, consumerization of what had been an enterprise product up to that point, that it actually changed the enterprise buying cycles. And we saw all of this rush to ChatGPT style solutions for inside the enterprise. I personally, I've had these conversations. I've also talked to other people who sell into these markets, either from a software services standpoint. The only thing anybody would really talk to them about was ChatGPT, OpenAI, generative AI, large language models. And these things existed before ChatGPT. They've gotten better since then, and there's been a lot more activity. But ChatGPT really just reframed the possibilities for everybody. And I think that's really important. And that people had seen demonstrations that this was kind of interesting, but until they had a chance to test drive it themselves, they didn't really understand how good it could be. And they're saying, oh, geez, wow, if I could have this inside my enterprise, it might change everything. And it's just that consumerization of IT. We've seen this time and time again over the last 15 years. Something shows up on the iPhone, then all of a sudden they're changing internal applications in order to be more iPhone-like or to support it on an iPhone or something like that. Or people have been using, certain games or other type of user interfaces from a consumer standpoint. All of a sudden, enterprise users are saying, hey, I tried this thing out. Why can't we do that with our applications? And the same thing happened here.
Yeah, and people always, there's often a discussion about like, oh, did a product create a market, or did the market demand the product? Was it just the time of this coming together in terms of the technology and the interest and the ability to use it for so many things? But whatever the specifics behind it, it felt like a really crystallizing moment. I mean, I was looking back at like the first time I wrote about ChatGPT specifically, and I referred to it as adding personality and trivia to GPT-3, because we already knew that GPT-3 was impressive and doing impressive things. But seeing how ChatGPT could recontextualize basic things and answer questions in a way that was sometimes helpful or entertaining, and understanding that it was already helping things like coding, which obviously informs so many other aspects of digital life. It was it's not surprising that it was so quickly adopted, but what is surprising is how much everything else had to adjust what they do because of it, rather than just adopting it wholesale.
So the interesting thing here is the UI made the product category. And we've seen this in the past. So there were smartphones before the iPhone, but then the UI with the touch, swipe, pinch, zoom, pinch, all of those affordances made the smartphone just like that much more appealing, that much more effective to meet a lot of people's needs. And I was talking to a lot of software companies in the first quarter of this year, and they're like, geez, we actually have used LLMs. They're part of our product. But like, we're not getting credit for it. Everyone just says, where's ChatGPT? And a lot of it was really just the alignment problem, because basically they said, okay, well, what are people familiar with? Oh, WhatsApp, or something like that. And they're like, oh, well, and I can just chat with it like something that I already know. So it's as if it's like a person. And so I think that the UI and the tuning, and like part of the UI is not just the way it looks and the way you navigate, but also the way it responds. And And I think it was so familiar, and it's such a simple idea in retrospect, but it made all the difference.
And it's also, with all the caveats about, yes, mistakes and issues, and far from perfect, but again, in terms of UI, and definitely a little bit in terms of marketing, or a lot in terms of marketing, it's so much closer to what the sort of movie, TV, sci-fi idea of a virtual assistant is. It's so much closer to the Star Trek computer, where you talk to it. It's like a voice assistant that actually understands what you're saying, regardless of the specific terms you use. It's an assistant that can understand the idea of style, or an author's approach to things. It gives so much more flexibility that feels so much more like the imagination of an assistant, that I think that really did consciously or unconsciously make people want more of that, because it feels so familiar from fiction, or from speculative ideas about the future.
Yeah, so now I'll just close this segment by saying that Adam Chyer, who's widely known as the creator of Siri, he wasn't the only person on the founding team, but he created his first voice assistant, back in 1993, I think it was. So, when Siri came out, I think it was 2009, he'd been working on that for a long time. And he would later created, that was acquired by Apple, and then he later created Viv Labs. But he told me that he tried ChatGPT sometime in the first week after it was launched, and he said it melted my mind. And the key thing he said is that what we did is we created doing assistants. They would do things for you. A lot of people know that Siri was the do engine, right? It's just like you ask it and it'll go and do things, and it'll do it because it has the information itself, or it goes out to a third-party service to get the information or execute the task. He said we couldn't do the knowing part. There's two parts, doing and knowing. We did the doing because that's what we could do. We couldn't do the knowing. But he said that first week in December, I looked at the knowing part and I said, check. ChatGPT just did that. And so now it's a point of sort of putting the pieces together.
Yeah, and it's maybe not quite a perfect comparison, but it does always make me think about looking at old photos of computers and interacting with them. And it's like, oh, you had to literally move around vacuum tubes, or you had to put in a punch card. And then imagine one of those people, and then they sit down and type something into a computer and it performs the same thing. It almost feels like that level of communication upgrade with a machine. And that is, it's not that you necessarily think that it's thinking, but its ability to parse what you're saying is so much greater that it feels like an entirely different world compared to what you were doing before.
Yeah, it totally is. And Jürgen Gravestein says here, the power of the conversational interface has been underestimated until ChatGPT, I guess. Yeah, and I think that's part of it. But I think the conversational interface has always been good. It's the response. It's the full interaction that was sort of what was not fulfilling the needs. Jens Mandel says, hey, Adam. Hey, everybody. By the way, this is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We try to do this every week. Just give you the rundown of what's going on in generative AI land. Let us know if you're out there on LinkedIn or YouTube. Just tell us where you're watching from. That's always great to see who's out there. And please make comments, contribute to the discussion.
Yeah, I would also just say related to what Adam told you about, it melting his mind. I think to me, it's also that, as impressive as Siri and other voice assistants were when they came out, their limitations were very clear, like stark, like it can do this, it cannot do this. And it's not that ChatGPT and others don't have limitations or issues or restrictions. It's that they're so much fuzzier that it often feels like you can't find what it can't do. You only just find out what it's still learning to do.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. That's a really good point. Now, OpenAI has been in the news about a lot of things the last couple of weeks. So we don't need to go into all of this. I think most people probably caught up on it, but let's just talk about it a little bit. So we had a 106-hour timeline that stretched out. I kept updating this article. In fact, I had another article that was equally long, and then I had to do a second article just to create the timeline that was better. And I think this whole thing it started on Thursday night. They decided to fire Sam, set up a time on Friday, the 17th, to talk to him. Was noon local time. Then they fired him. The night before, the board informed the CTO, Mira Murati, that she would be the new CEO. A few minutes after Sam was told he was fired, they put out a statement that he'd been fired for not being consistent in his communications with the board, which everyone's still wondering exactly what that means. So then a few minutes later, Greg Brockman was told that he was being removed from the board, but they'd love to have him stay around. He's critical to the team. And he said, well, I'm out of here. And then there was this whole revolt by the entire staff basically said, hey,
95%.
We're all leaving. In fact, it was 85% of the staff ultimately signed a petition saying, oh, by the way, if you don't reinstate Sam, we're all leaving. And by the way, they were trying to negotiate Sam's return that Sunday. So that would have been over that weekend, 18th and 19th of November. Satya Nadella got involved. He was trying to broker some sort of compromise. And then the board said no, they dug in their heels. And Satya just said, okay. And within minutes, Sam said, hey, we can't get an agreement. Right after that, Satya wrote, I've extended an offer to hire Sam, Greg, and the entire OpenAI team. Bring them in as a special unit inside of Microsoft, total power move. And that gave everybody at the company cover when they put the petition out. They knew they had a fallback, that the following Monday they could just have their Microsoft badge, have all the funding they needed. They actually even set up offices for them in San Francisco. Everything was set up, I think, within 48 hours for basically enough to do hundreds of staff.
And I will say it's entertaining to see in public how many other tech companies were attempting to recruit everyone who they thought were leaving OpenAI, because they're like, oh my god, this is the talent pool that we want right now.
Yeah, and a big turning point, I think, was that when Ilya Sutskever, the one who told Sam he was fired, one of the co-founders, also a board member, basically said, I regret what I did, and he was trying to get the board back, but then they'd fired 2 members from the board, so they only had 6.
Yeah, I would say it's also 4, a very small
and then
board.
He's one of 4 as opposed to 3, half of the other guys. So it was really interesting. And then eventually, after that petition, it came. There were just a couple of days where they didn't talk much, or maybe it wasn't even a couple of days. It was 36 hours or something like that. And then they said, "Oh, our bad. Sam has agreed to return as CEO. Greg's coming back as well, and we're going to have a new board. The existing board members, except for Adam D'Angelo, interestingly,
the most surprising one to say,
gone. And then Brett Taylor, formerly of Salesforce, formerly of a bunch of things, and Larry Summers, former U.S. Secretary of Treasury, joined the board. And then there's this picture of Greg, within an hour of everything getting resolved, supposedly, everyone was back in the office partying.
It does look like that viral video of the sorority house look. It's everyone crammed together, hundreds of people in a small space. But apparently everyone's very happy.
Exactly. Okay, so throughout all of this, there was a big question about the motivation. They said, oh, he's not being consistently candid, I think that was the term. So he's misleading them. He's leaving out information. He's telling them lies. We don't know exactly. And somebody just put this in here. Consistently candid is the important word in the statement. If he consistently did what he wanted other than what the board decided, now is the board pro safety or pro business? So I think this is this is a thing, right? The first they said, okay, he's not consistent. So it seemed like a business issue. It's okay, well, what is it? He wasn't candid about, was there a personnel issue? Was there malfeasance? All these other types of things. And then by the next morning, it was clear based on the information that was coming out, it was oh no, it wasn't actually that. It was safety. Because they felt like they couldn't come up with a single reason, because people kept asking them. In fact, they brought in Nadella and a few other, and then Emmett Shear came. He was a short. Mir Murati was CEO for 48 hours, and then Emmett Shear was CEO for 48 hours. Former founder, co-founder of Twitch, came in. He's just like, okay, give me a reason. Like, what did? And they couldn't come up with anything specific. They just said he was so persuasive that they fooled him time and time again. And then people were talking about his business interests, but you could see that was falling apart. And by midday Saturday, it was like, no, it's a safety issue. We just showed him something that's amazing. It could be great for people. We'd love to sell it to them, but also dangerous to the world. And he and Greg just want to commercialize it. And so then it was also about safety. And then like that sort of broke down after, because we're like, well, what is the safety? You can't talk about it. Okay. So this whole thing gets resolved. And then I feel like on Thursday, which was Thanksgiving here in the US, somebody was trying to save face late Wednesday, early Thursday. And then all of a sudden we hear about Q-Star. This thing's amazing. So it's probably based on Q learning. It's probably the thing that Sam had talked about, saying he saw something amazing a couple weeks ago. This was like the week before he got fired. There was a leak of a memo saying, hey, this thing is amazing. It can do grade school math now fairly consistently. And like, of course, robot overlords are like right around the corner. We better be careful. And I was looking at it. I'm driving to family's house, or my in-laws' house, for Thanksgiving. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I look at the news. I'm like, oh, this is super interesting. Because firstly, I was like, oh, the former board members, if Q-Star is really that big of a safety issue, the former board members can just say, hey, I was trying to protect the world. That's why it's not that I'm incompetent, which everyone was like, these people are incompetent handling this thing that way. I was just trying to save the world. Isn't that great? So my incentives are to give people evidence of Q-Star, and that's like so amazing. And then like all the people who are what we call AI doomers or the safetyists, people who are worried about the robot overlords, they want to pause AI research. Well, geez, here's another reason. Thankfully, this came out. If they hadn't fired Sam, we never would have known about it until it was too late. So they have an incentive to push the story. So like on Thanksgiving Thursday, no, obviously Europe didn't, in Canada and other places didn't have Thanksgiving that day, but the US, for a lot of the story was fueled, did. It's just like everybody was talking about this on a national holiday. And oh, by the way, the AI boomers, the people who think like the accelerationists, everyone will see, they're like, this is great. It has huge potential benefit to humanity. Media news sites also loved it because they get a lot of links. Social media loved it. And then OpenAI, they get more positive publicity because they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we're so amazing. We created this great thing. I know some people are scared about it, but just like keep your eyes on us. And isn't this a nice distraction from all of the, ridiculousness that we had from a management perspective? I was like, wow, this is like the best story ever. Everybody benefits from it.
Which is, as they always say, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And in many directions, that was the case there.
I love this whole idea that it can do grade school math, so therefore it's going to surpass Einstein very soon. And whether it can do grade school math or not, we'll see. Like, it's quite questionable. Okay, so in any event, that was super fun. Talking about all those things, and we'll consider that our featured story. Oh, here's the question: the big question is from Jürgen. Who leaked this to Reuters in the first place? And was Reuters right to run it? So I think Reuters was probably right to run it, although it was fairly clear they had no corroboration. And they also didn't get to see the document. They got one person or maybe two people's characterization of the document. So it seemed a little flimsy, but I get that. It's news. I mean, like people would want to know about that. And if that did catalyze there being more information being released, okay. So I think that's like totally legitimate. Should they have done more background? I don't know. Should they have been maybe less breathless about, oh, this is terrible? Yes. But the people who really leaked it, I think it's the board members.
Yeah, which is why they probably couldn't be on the record about it. And Reuters was right on it, but I think, but it's I do wonder the fact that they couldn't get anyone on the record about it at all in any way, like even just a formal, like, non-informative statement from OpenAI or Microsoft or someone was a little, like, I was a little questioning about that. But I just, yeah, I feel like you're right that it was 100% a distraction. You know, and you know, we haven't even touched on the whirlwind of news and announcements touched off by what was happening at OpenAI because of now this sense from potential rivals or others that they were like, oh, this is our, you know, the hegemony that we had talked about a couple weeks ago now seems in jeopardy. So this is our moment to try to topple OpenAI and ChatGPT from their place at the you know, from
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So during this whole period of time, it was reported that a lot of the big companies who were deep into budget commitments, product development commitments with OpenAI were getting worried. And there was a report, I don't know how true it is, that Anthropic had fielded 100 requests from OpenAI customers over the weekend. Several other companies said they had received a number of requests. And then something very curious happened. In the US, unless you are selling something for Black Friday, you do not announce new products on Thanksgiving week.
Especially
it's just a bad week to do it. However, everybody was so focused, particularly in the tech and finance industries, on the OpenAI debacle. And because there was this opportunity potentially to get new customers, drive more attention, we had some announcements. And so the first one that came out was our friends over at Anthropic, Claude 2.1. I can almost guarantee you that was scheduled to be released this week, right? But they're just like, I just have to put this out now.
Well, it's scheduled, and I agree, because that's, as it's coming out is now. It was announced then. That's the other thing, is these were announcements, not releases necessarily.
That's true. That's exactly right. It wasn't available, and it's starting to be available this week, right? Because like through AWS and stuff like that. So Claude 2.1, they did a couple of things. Not only are we here, oh, by the way, OpenAI is in the only game in town. We're here. We have a 200,000 token context window. And we had the 100,000, and we were the best for a long time. And then OpenAI just said GPT-4's got 128,000 tokens. Oh, by the way, we've got 200,000 tokens. So pay a lot of attention to us. So I thought that was fascinating. And that was followed, I think it was the next day. We didn't report about it until a couple days later. InflectionAI announced Inflection 2. Their Inflection, if people know Inflection, they probably know it because of Pi, the personal assistant, which I'm not really sure has had much traction in the market. It's hard to tell, but they did announce, I think you were one of the first to report about this back in June. They announced that they had also opened up an enterprise API to compete for the enterprise users. And so now they've got Inflection 2, and mostly it's much better than Inflection 1. And they're basically saying, hey, you know, we're almost as good as GPT-4, depending on the tests that we're doing. They sort of cherry picked a bunch of tests and said, we're as good as Palm. So if you're thinking about an alternative to OpenAI, you might be thinking Google. Well, we're just as good as Google, and we're not Google. And the reason you're not using Google right now, you probably have good reasons for that. So, and like, don't worry about Anthropic. They're not out there. So I thought that was fascinating. We had those two things. And then you had another story here. This is sort of gets us into funding fountain. AI 21 Labs. They had previously announced 155 million. They just added 53 million. Does anybody think that had been in works for a while? I'm guessing over the weekend, a bunch of people who'd gotten closed out of it came back in and said, really let us in. Or some of the existing ones increased it. So they, 155 became a $200 million funding round. Yeah,
that's the thing, is like all three of these, AI 21 slightly less, but Anthropic and Inflection have big investors, very deep pocket investors, billions and billions of dollars, either already invested or promised to be invested from others, like plans to build truly gigantic GPU networks. Like, they're planning for the long term in the technology, but when the moment came to get public attention, yes, suddenly Thanksgiving weekend, Friday of Thanksgiving weekend is not usually the time you scramble to write big, complex technical stories, but that's apparently what everyone had to do.
Absolutely. And AI 21 Labs actually has, I believe, has a new product coming out that maybe should have been ready earlier in the month, but for whatever reason wasn't. So I thought that if they were going to announce, they were going to announce this new product, but maybe that's coming in the next couple of weeks. But the funding round was a way for them to get in the cycle. And then we had some other things that happened. Sort of, we don't have a story on it yet, but Yi, which is Fei Li's company, has a new small language model that's sort of top of the OpenAI. So like all these things just have happened over the last week in order to build on that.
Yeah,
and we've got more stories, but let's since we just went to funding, let's talk about another funding story because we've had a couple other things that have happened. So let's break away for a moment from all things OpenAI, and let's just say like generative AI is kind of a big market. There's a lot going on. So you wrote a story yesterday about SoapBox Labs. So SoapBox Labs does speech recognition for kids. It's very different than speech rec for adults because they're physically, their vocal cords are different. Their speech patterns are different because they're still learning mastery of the language. And very surprising to me. Like I guess I'm not surprised that they got acquired because I actually expected them to get acquired within the next year. I was actually surprised at who acquired them. But what's the story here?
Yeah, I mean, SoapBox Labs, I feel like I've been writing about them forever. They've some really impressive technology. They've put together partnerships with educational institutions and educational technology providers to do everything from fluency tests to tutoring to teacher assistant work to really help teach kids everything, how to read and speak. And they got acquired by Curriculum Associates, which is a relatively a blue chip kind of company. They're over 50 years old. They do education technology of all kinds, but they're usually sort of in the background. They work with educational groups, and now it seems they're really interested in a cutting edge kind of approach to education and to educational testing. And with SoapBox Labs as their sort of R&D hub, they can really open up their AI and voice AI work, which will probably be really important, especially as educational institutions start probably trusting written tests and essays less with the advent of ChatGPT potentially helping students a little too much writing essays. I think it's a really solid win. I mean, the Irish AI scene is not talked about a lot, but they do have quite a lot of talent there and access to the EU talent pool. So.
Yeah, it's a 10-year-old company, SoapBox Labs. Oh yeah, Jackson had just asked that question, like what is it? So they've been around for over a decade. A lot of it came out of the research that the founder Patricia Scanlon had been doing. She was actually just on the podcast, the VoiceBot podcast, a couple months ago, so you guys can get an update on what they've been doing. She's also Ireland's AI ambassador, like all sorts of different, interesting things. But I thought that was fascinating. Not surprising to me that they were acquired by an education technology and content provider. Was surprisingly this private company that I wasn't that familiar with. Apparently, the company does hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue annually. I just would have expected like McGraw-Hill or one of their other customers to be more likely because of being bigger, but very interesting. You wrote about another story here. Generative AI video startup Pika raises $35 million. What's going on with Pika?
Yeah, it's a really cool. I find the text to video world quite fascinating. In this case, it is a generative AI video synthetic media company. So it's you describe a video and it puts it in there. You can edit a video. Everything from how the look of different people or characters in it to clothing people are wearing. It's really kind of cool. And they were sort of under the radar. They announced the funding and their first product at the same time. It seems not really accessible. There's a waiting list that I'm on, but with the caveat of course, they're going to showcase their best stuff right away. It looks comparable to things like Runway or to some of the things Google's been testing out. I think it's the kind of tool we're going to see popping up more and more in the sort of synthetic media world.
I'm glad you brought up Runway, because what company announces their $35 million funding round the day they announce their product with no users and everything like that? Like, who did that? And so Runway's sort of interesting because they raised, they have $1 billion valuation. They, came up in another story this week as well. So they're really, a significant company in the space. And so I think that must be the bet. The bet must be that Runways need some competition. So you also wrote about a stable diffusion synthetic media hub, Civitai, which is really, it's really just a community, isn't it? Is it like a website with a community for sharing?
Yeah, it came up that way, and it has sort of two elements of it that make it stand out. Like, so yes, one, it is about sharing like creations and showing off like what people are making, which is certainly interesting. But it's almost a community prompt engineering world too, because it's not just saying, here's what I made. People are sharing, oh, here's how I made it. Here's the kinds of language that I found work well with this very popular generative image tool, and an open source one at that. So it really it opens up things for people who want to play around with it, who maybe don't necessarily have the instinct of what is a good prompt for image generation, and they're talking about setting up marketplaces and really making it a commercial space as well. But I think it's just sort of showing like the next stage of these communities. It's not just code, it's not just writing, it's not just that kind of stuff. It's actually going to be about prompts for generative AI tools.
All right, great. Hey, so everybody, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. We talk about the biggest news in generative AI land, and we've had a ton of it. So really good to talk about OpenAI and ChatGPT. If you joined late, you could just watch the recording on YouTube, on VoiceBot's YouTube channel. It's just Andrew maybe can put the link in the chat for everybody, because I think you'll find some of that interesting. Now, I'm Brett Kinsella, founder of Synthedia and VoiceBot.ai. Joining me is Eric Schwartz, who's the head writer at VoiceBot.ai. Now, I want to stay with the money theme, and we're going to go back a week. Tuesday. This happened last week. It's generative AI oriented, had nothing to do with OpenAI. It was previously scheduled. It is the earnings release from Nvidia. Okay, so what you see on the screen, if you're watching, is Nvidia's quarterly revenue. And it goes up through a couple quarters ago, and it's just like, oh, it's like a nice upward growth. And in particular, the data center is like sort of like a nice climb. Their revenue from gaming grew pretty well through the beginning of 2022, and then it's had a sharp drop off, and then it's starting to grow again. But that doesn't matter. The only thing you really need to look at is over on the right-hand side of the chart, where it's almost vertical. Their data center business, which was growing at a nice pace, just went vertical. And they just had the two biggest quarters back to back. They're doing over $10 billion a year in their data center business, which is selling GPUs to cloud hosting providers, mostly for AI training and for AI inference workloads. And then this most recent quarter, that went up again. I mean, so they are just minting money. And if you think about this as sort of the supply side, so the supply is these large language models, but before you can supply a large language model to the market so you can start selling it to people and they can pay you and they can get benefits, you actually have to train it. You have to have the infrastructure in place. And oh my, Nvidia seems to be the Levi's in the gold rush right now. Just they can't make the stuff fast enough.
Yeah. And there's a reason that you see Jensen Huang, Nvidia CEO, pop up on stage with every other company, because every company wants to show whether it's their investors or users, that they have a good relationship with Nvidia, the source of everything they need to sell their products. So it's a sign that they're in a good spot, and it gives Nvidia even more exposure. Not that they really need it, as we saw from that, but Jensen Huang can really write his own ticket for the rest of his career, I think.
I mean, it's just insane. People are always saying like Netflix should be the end and Fang, or maybe it's now Mango or something like that. But like, come on, it's always been Nvidia. It's just like people didn't know it. That's the end. Netflix is like, it's not an important technology company. It's a service company. Nvidia is a very important technology company. It is the central player, and it is so funny because basically it's Jensen at Google Cloud's annual conference, at Microsoft's Azure's annual conference, and at Amazon's annual conference. He's got the same leather jacket. He looks the same. He stares right in the eye for a different executive of a giant company and says basically the same thing. Like, you're the best partner. We love working with you. We're doing something special. And he's doing it with all of them.
Yeah, it does often feel like he could walk out there and like have them kiss the ring literally, and they would have to do it.
Okay, so let's get back into products because so that was the money section. All right, so we just did a quick money section. Hopefully, people appreciated that. But there's more products. We didn't even talk about all of them, and some of these were previously scheduled. But let's talk about one that actually predated all of this rigmarole. And that's called PartyRock.
Yes.
So kind of interesting. I think you have a take on this, which is different from mine. But GPTs came out a couple weeks ago, or beginning of the month, at OpenAI's Dev Day, and those became super popular. In fact, I didn't even talk about that. I think I have another story on that where GPT, they stopped taking subscriptions. Oh, we did talk about that briefly because GPTs are so popular. But this whole idea that you can create a custom experience, you can basically create your own LLM-driven chat experience, which is kind of like ChatGPT. PartyRock had already rolled out, or they've been using it internally within Amazon. And it's a way for you to use Amazon Bedrock, all the LLMs based on that, in order to create these personalized experiences backed by an LLM. It's not quite the same as ChatGPT. It doesn't have that. But it is this idea that you can sort of create your own solution. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like it. I played around with it, just came up with a couple of funny little ideas. And to me, it feels like the Amazon approach to what they did with Alexa skills in terms of making it easy for people who either have little or no technical ability to make, not like a lucrative or necessarily long-term valuable voice skill. You can do the same thing with a little generative AI chatbot tool. You can make an image, you can have a little conversation without having to understand the technology behind it. And I think that this is how Amazon helps foster its own community of developers and gets developers used to the idea of working within AWS to do these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Leslie Pound's in the audience. I think she may have used these. I know Roger Kibbe, several other people have done this. I created one. In fact, that article I just showed, I actually compared, I tried to recreate a similar experience between a GPT and PartyRock. And they're quite a bit different. I mean, there's a few things in here. So first of all, PartyRock's English only. You can select multiple models, which is pretty interesting. In this case, I find Claude to be by far the best. You have Jurassic's in there from AI21. There's a smaller Claude Instant is in there. Now Titan is in there. The image generation isn't great. I don't know why that is, because it's Stable Diffusion XL. Should be better than it is. I was just super surprised. It's there's no persistence with GPTs. You can come back to and continue your previous chat. This doesn't happen. It's it's gone. You can do the snapshot and there's and it'll just take a picture, which is cool. But there's also guardrails. I don't even know what it was. I didn't like the word oxymoron or something that was in, and it wouldn't do. The guardrail said you can't do this. I don't know why.
What we talked about with the rush of releases or announcements before they're necessarily ready. This does to me feel a little bit oh, GPTs are out there. we're almost done with our version of it. It's 70% done. Let's put it out there and make it free for now until we're really ready for the proper release.
Absolutely. It is free to use. You don't even have to. I think you can just do a social sign up. You don't even have to put a credit card in. You have to go to AWS. I think people should check it out. It's super interesting. It's really more of a learning tool, but you can see how it could be something else. And it is interesting. They do have a store, like a PartyRock store, like an old skills store from Alexa. And this is out before the GPT store, which is interesting. But like, I find these to be less functional. There are actually some excellent features in it. Like you can see different capabilities. You can tune the model a little bit in terms of the temperature, side by side, and all these other types of things. But it's not the same.
Right, but you know who's going to be using it a lot? The same people signing up for all the new Amazon free AI classes.
Well, exactly. And I think that's exactly. It's a perfect tool for that, because actually, as opposed to GPTs where you just type in what you want and it sort of gives you a template, like pushes it out, and then you can ask for changes to it, basically by changing the prompt. Anyone can do it. This one you actually have to think through, much more like you're architecting a solution. So it does require more cognitive load, and a little more experience is useful, although like I don't think you really need it. But I think it's kind of fascinating. And this leads us to our next story. Amazon also introduced Q. So in a lot of ways, you might think about Q as like a Chat GPT for enterprise. And I think this is the point. It'll connect to your internal data sources. It's trained. They don't say what it's trained on, but they basically say it can use any of the models in the Amazon Bedrock Garden. It's just basically a chatbot that's supposed to be grounded in your data. And you think about it, Microsoft has a brilliant strategy here, because they have Copilot, which is based on OpenAI. So they can add this to all of their stack. But people who don't use Microsoft, they can use ChatGPT Enterprise, and Microsoft owns half of that business. So they have a lot of benefits here. But I think this is not, although it kind of looks like it's competing with Azure and Google, because it's really not. It's really more an alternative to ChatGPT Enterprise. If you don't want to be tied into the Google Workspace or the Microsoft 365 productivity suites, and you want something from a big provider, ChatGPT Enterprise, Amazon Q are it.
Yeah, it is absolutely that. It's the Amazon interpretation of the Copilot idea. It's the the chatbot lens through which you put all of your other products, whether it's internal business helper, an assistant for customer service, for business intelligence, inventory planning. It's AWS. It puts AWS in a position to say you don't have to, if you're using AWS, you don't have to switch to get access to the kind of Copilot that Microsoft offers, or the Duet that Google is offering. And they made a point. I mean, the reInvent was a lot of interesting news, but they really made a point of saying that the way that AWS functions will stay the same. It's just that that flexibility now applies to generative AI models and tools.
Absolutely. Okay. Sticking with Amazon, you had a couple of stories, and we can sort of hit them both very quickly. They're both related to Bedrock. And so you have new features, Titan models, agents.
Yep.
And then you have a bunch of other services that were announced. Give us the quick breakdown of that.
Yeah. So it's just in terms of the new services in that piece, talking about Amazon Lex, talking about the transcription services that Amazon offers. It's really about making those that technology part of AWS services in general. And then the Bedrock, they're really making that the hub for generative AI. So that means adding new models, new third-party models, Claude 2.1, as I mentioned, and their in-house one, Amazon Titan, new versions of that model, new multimodal options, including an image generator, really just trying to say, whatever it is you're doing with generative AI, AWS can handle it. We talk about like how these are all proxies for the cloud war, and this is Amazon and AWS saying, whatever, the cloud war it shouldn't be a generative AI feature or tool that makes you decide which cloud service provider to turn to. If you like AWS, you'll never feel like, oh, you're missing out on something else. We'll take the best of all the other ones and add our own stuff to it.
Yeah, it's a good summary. That's sort of where they are. It's, Q is kind of surprising. I wasn't expecting that, but I wasn't expecting it yet. I think that's what I was thinking. So
Yeah.
So I think that's they're moving in the right direction. For a company that tries to say that it was doing this for a long time, and they did have an LLM, but they were basically caught flat-footed at the market acceleration, and they really since April have zeroed in on this, and they're executing. They're making very significant progress over 6 months.
Yeah, and they made a point, really. I mean, all of the companies do this, but I feel like Amazon really was highlighting how many and diverse a set of clients and partners it has in every industry, really trying to highlight the fact that whatever it is you're doing, they can help you with it.
All right, folks, we're going to do one more story. We're going to do winners and losers of the week. I hope if you guys have winners and losers of the week or the last 2 weeks or the last month, if you want, you can put them in the chat. We'll try to reference those as well. And I hope you'll come back next week. We try to do this just about every week. I did want to just hit one more story, though, before we go into winners and losers. Stability AI rolled out stable video diffusion, which I think is pretty significant. And I wrote another story this week about sort of the prospects for Stability AI, the creator of Stable Diffusion, are they the creator of Stable Diffusion? Not really, because Ludwig Maximilian University researchers were, but Stable Diffusion or Stability AI gave them the servers to create it on. In any event, they're considered the stewards of the open source solution, which has the most users in the text to image space, although that's not guaranteed they will continue to have that. But Stable Video Diffusion is very interesting. They're not the first to market with this, but they weren't also the first to market with the text to image generators. And it's really rudimentary. If you look at the stuff, it's not great. I don't think it's as good as the stuff we saw from Meta, Make a Video, or Imagine, or Funaki. Maybe as good as Funaki, but Funaki's much longer form. These are 4-second videos it can create, but they're pretty good, and it's open source. And so I think it's really significant in that way that they come out with something that's going to be it's open source. So the people are just going to start to innovate around it. And the companies that have been keeping this close, like Meta and Google, might find that their lead evaporates quickly once you get developers everywhere in the world working on improving this.
Yeah. Well, I can mention it in the winners and losers, but yeah, it is one of those times where a company's name feels a little ironic, I'll say.
Instability at Stable Diffusion. All right, cool. Welcome to the Cambrian explosion of GenAI chatbots. Absolutely, that is probably a theme that I think November is summed up, whether it be PartyRock or GPTs, because we're tracking GPTs. I see 7,000 based on the way that we're looking at. Some people have claimed there are 10 or 15,000. Might be true. I think when you include private ones, that's probably true. But in terms of published, we can find 7,000 of them. So it's fairly significant. There's a lot of people who have at least tried at this. But let's do winners and losers of the week. You get to start. You pick your winner or your loser. What do you want?
I'll just continue what I was saying and say, yeah, for loser of the week, it's Stability, but more than that, it's the CEO of Stability, who apparently has been getting calls to step down from major investors. Ahmad Mostak is being asked to step down by some of the investors. Apparently, there's been rumors of acquisition talks and questions about whether people are going to stay there. So it's as we said, it's going through some rough patches right now.
Yeah, and they've had a rough run of it for a lot of reasons. They've had 13 major executive departures in the last year, and it's not that big of a company. So I didn't know they would have 13 major executives, but it's like a revolving door over there. They got a $1 billion valuation a little over a year ago. They were trying to get $4 billion this spring, couldn't get it. They've done 2 small, basically venture debt rounds since then. And then a lot of things have come out about the CEO's background, like sort of misleading stuff on his resume, potentially like not paying tax. The company didn't pay taxes. There's all sorts of like crazy stuff going on. So it's kind of an amazing company in some ways in terms of what it's been able to do in terms of shepherding that community. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see where it goes out. Okay, so my loser of the week or the last 2 weeks is OpenAI because they lost a lot of trust with people, and enterprises that were okay, sort of get along, go along, like you guys are sort of the leaders. We're just going to keep working with you. They were proactively reaching out to all their competitors, and I think it's going to take a while to reestablish that. If they did not have the Azure backstop, I think they'd be in a very critical situation. They can win back some of that, the ChatGPT stuff, and like through Azure and all these things. They're probably going to do just fine. In fact, probably really well. And maybe Q Star will take them to the next level. But I just think that they lost a lot of trust.
I would definitely agree with that.
Okay, who do you have for a winner?
Well, it's not to clash with what you just said, but even though OpenAI may or may not have problems going forward, Sam Altman will not. You may or may not believe that he's really does have the Midas touch, but when it comes to a question of like where who can raise their hand and just get a check with a lot of zeros on it dropped into it, it's him. Whether it's continuing at OpenAI or going to Microsoft, I mean, I don't think it necessarily would have happened, certainly, but if there had been some sort of open auction to hire him to run your AI department, I feel like it would have had a lot of very big names rushing to attend. Yeah,
I think it's fair to say maybe OpenAI is a winner and a loser. I mean, but I think that yes, Sam has been elevated to almost a mythical level right now. We'll see if he can live up to that.
Yeah.
My winner is Anthropic. They just got a lot of inbound. They were already kind of emerging as the alternative is like one of the, if not the primary alternative to OpenAI in the large language model space. If you just look at the benchmarks, you look at the context window, all these other things, and they've got a new model out. It's even better. It's like closer to closing the gap with GPT-4. A lot of interest, and obviously we saw with Amazon this week, they're really pushing Anthropic. They have a big investment in them as well. So that's my winner for the week. I think there's probably a few others that we could have said, and maybe everybody who's not OpenAI, but I think Anthropic in particular is going to get the lion's share of the benefit.
100%. Yeah, I think. There's going to be other people benefiting, but Anthropic, at least right now, is the big benefiter of chaos at OpenAI.
All right, folks, consider yourself informed. That's the Generative AI News Rundown. I'm Brett Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Give us a comment on the way out. Let us know what you thought about the show. What did we miss? We didn't cover all the stories because there's so many. It's sort of ridiculous, but we'll get to them next week. I hope you can join us. All right, folks. Bye-bye.